YouTube so people can watch on later. All right, Hugh, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Just like to welcome all of District 2 on board again tonight. This week we've got a little bit of a change of pace. We were planning on having a CFA scientist on to talk about some fire behaviour. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to help. But what we've done is just moved a week forward, and we're going to talk about some Grassfire tactics. So tonight we've got two guest presenters. We've got Eain McRae and Brett Wagstaff, both coming on board. And for some people it may be back to a bit of basics, but this is the beginning of our pre-season leading into the fire danger period. So as I said, some of it tonight might be a little bit back to the basics. For other people, there'll be some learnings, and at some stage we may even target a few people in the audience to pose a bit of a few questions around their experiences in running grass fires, etc. So before I introduce our first two, or the two presenters, I'll just do acknowledgement of country. So the City of Greater Bendigo is on Jar Jar Run country, whose ancestors and their descendants are the traditional owners of this country. We acknowledge their living culture and their unique role in the life of this region. So from here on, at this stage, I'd just like to see if Eain McRae, you online?
Yeah, Hugh, I'm here, and thanks for that.
G'day, Eain. How are you going tonight? And Brett Wagstaff, are you online?
I am, thanks, Hugh.
G'day, Brett. How are you going?
Good, thank you.
So between these two guys, they've got a huge wealth of experience, and similar to a lot of the other. And Brett's been, I was actually on in the first week and spoke about some training, and we got some really good feedback. And I work closely with both of these guys in their training roles, but also in some of their specialist roles. So similar to other weeks, we might just get Eain and Brett to give a quick rundown of what they do within CFA and what some of their roles are also. So Brett, would you like to kick it off, please?
Yep, thanks, Hugh. Yeah, so I'm an instructor based out of District 2, out of Kangaroo Flat. So I pretty much run anything from minimum skills or bushfire firefighter right through to IMT training, so Operations Officer Level 2, and bushfire investigation for Victoria and other parts of the country as well. Sector Commander, you name it. I think there's about 22 different courses that I deliver that I need to have my head around at some point. When we're not doing that, it's course design and updating stuff. So as I mentioned last time I was on, we've just finished the chainsaw package. Pretty much all the CFA's training materials went out of date last year when they did the PUA 19 updates. So it means that we need to look at everything, and just starting to look at a few other courses now. So that's what we do when we're not instructing.
Yeah, good.
In terms of operations, I'm Operations Officer Level 3 IMT and a fire investigator, so I'll get out there a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Just, Eain, a little bit about yourself, your role and some of the other spaces you play in within the IMT sector.
Sure, Hugh, thanks for that. Like Brett, I'm a wildfire instructor based in District 20 up at Kerrang, and I suppose relatively new to the instructor role, but I've been around for quite a while, but hence the grey hair and the whatever. I, like Brett, deal with most of the bushfire courses, those sorts of things, the minimum skills, etc. And one of the, I guess the expertise I bring to the table as well is within the aviation sector. Did spend 6 years with the State Aircraft Unit down in Melbourne, and play on the air desk down at the State Control Centre, and Air Ops Manager, Air Attack Supervisor, etc., and provide training roles in a lot of the specialist aviation stuff as well. So the other thing that I'll bring to the table, I guess, from that perspective is that when we talk about grass fires, particularly tonight, a lot of the stuff I see is from the air, which is a totally different perspective to what the guys would be experiencing in the truck, on the back of the truck, on the ground. And I see a lot of things that can contribute to your success from that perspective.
Yeah, fantastic, Eain. You don't know this, but next week we're actually planning on doing a session on working with aircraft as we're moving forward, and I may even lean on you to come back on next week. You just don't know that yet. So, great work. I suppose a little bit of my background, as most people would know, come from a volunteer background and being with CFA for 15 to 16 years as a career firefighter. Since 2013, I've been involved with the leading and station officer promotional assessments is in the bushfire chute and the closed book theory, and a couple of years ago took over from Carl Stibble-Jay as the team leader for the career firefighters. So across the state, there's 3 or 4 people that work in that bushfire space that we make sure that the doctrine that we're teaching was up to speed. And then locally, of course, been involved in similar to these guys, level 3 ops, IM2 role, incident control level 2, and then of course in the RDO space across Victoria. So from here, what we might do is kick off. So I'm going to sort of interact with these 2 gents tonight, and we may even may even lean into a few people that are online, and hopefully they can share their experiences. So Michelle or Brett, I'm not sure who's going to load the session up, but whenever you're ready.
Brett, are you happy for me to share my screen?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead when ready.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. So tonight I had a bit of a think about what we need to talk about here, and it's difficult to try and find something that's different but still relevant. So some of tonight will be review of stuff that you know, things that you know, and hopefully we'll add a bit of value, things that you don't know. Now obviously, we've had bushfire instructors engaged in District 2 for a fair while now, and we've been out spruiking these messages. And if you've heard some of these messages before, that's good. We've probably been doing our job and we've got across to the masses. And so some repetition's good, but I'll try and add a little bit of different context within tonight. So you can move to the next slide if you like, Michelle. So in terms of grassland curing, and if Michelle could bring up the photo for the next slide, please. Yep. No, not working.
Sorry, is that the mountain you're looking for?
No, next slide, so the grasses. No. Plagued by technical difficulties.
It's always the way, isn't it?
I can
enable editing.
I can drive it from here if you like.
All right, no worries. If you want to share that, because that's the grass screen that I've got.
Yeah, okay, sure. All right, how are we going? Can we see that one?
Yep, it's up now, Brett.
All right, how are we going? We can see this?
Yeah, front there, the main screen, first screen.
First screen hasn't moved to the next one yet.
No, not yet.
How about now? What are we seeing now? We're seeing some grasses?
Yep.
Sure. So when we talk about grass fire suppression, one of the key things we need to look at is grassland curing. And obviously, 0% cured is 100% green, won't burn, 100% dry. Grass is really dry, crackly, and generally won't retain any seed within the seed head, which is what we see pretty much after Christmas, particularly in those dry years, and in the really dry years a little bit before Christmas as well. But depending where you go, Gippsland may not cure completely in one given year at all. Interesting, when we look at the photo, and I'd ask you to look at the photo and consider grassland curing, you see that some of the areas there are green, and then we've also got some fairly dry areas as well. One of the things here is that the green area is phalaris grass, which is a deep-rooted perennial. It kind of confuses things when we're talking about curing, because it doesn't act the same way as what the annuals will. And in terms of curing, you know, for an organisation that is predominantly grass firefighting, we don't talk about grass much. I guess in my role I get to, and from a fire investigation point of view, we spend a lot of time staring at grass and looking at it in a way that other people wouldn't. So the green clumpy bits there, and in the right hand part of the screen shows some phalaris close up. As I say, it tends to be deep rooted. It won't cure the same as the rest of the grasses. A lot of those in the photo are wild oats and other things. And so it remains greener for a lot longer. It's generally not affected so much by drought conditions or even wet conditions. It's very deep rooted. And people ask, well, what's the point here, Brad? And why do we need to know the difference between annuals and perennials? Well, some of the phalaris actually dictates not only strategy but tactic. So what we see is areas that have got a lot of phalaris that are burning, that we may need to engage a different tactic in terms of grassfire attack with a tanker. So generally we find that if you're not on the black, squirting down into the base of this phalaris grass, which has got a big nest of dry material at the bottom, it tends to reignite quite often. So brigades like Reedsdale have a lot of phalaris around, and so they practice with these things. They see it a fair bit, and that they understand that sometimes they may need to fight from the black rather than the unburnt. So it does actually make a big difference. So if we're able to determine the grass type and determine a tactic based on grass type, and the other thing that falls out of that is the resourcing levels. So the resource level with these sorts of grasses tends to increase because we're going to have more mopping up operations, going to be more time and more effort in trying to put it out. Likewise, the likelihood of escapes days following increases. So it not only dictates tactic, but also the number of resources required. Similar things, some of the brigades listening in would have gone to the fire along the Bendigo Creek over summer, and that fire was on the books for a number of weeks, if not months, because of reignition into some of the rushes, and caused a lot of issues, so deep down hot residual burning. Did you have anything to add there, Eain?
Now, look, I was going to mention that when you talked about phalaris and those sorts of things, particularly the strategies, the tactics, as you mentioned, with that sort of stuff, and re-emphasise the point about your mopping up the overhaul that comes with it and the potential that exists with a lot of these species that are these clumps of grass, deep-rooted clumps of grass, do take a very long time and can't be properly done from the back of a truck. It's one of those things where you've got to do the hard work, you've got to get off the truck, you've got to do the work around them, check for hot spots, and just make sure that they are properly out so that we can move on and get to the next bit.
Yeah, for sure. So interesting that as firefighters, we actually need to know a little bit about grass types, annuals versus perennials. There you go. For what it's worth, have a bit more of a look. It determines curing rates and suppression tactics and strategy and resource level. So if you're out and about, take a bit of a look. Just move to the next slide if it'll let me. No, there we go. So hopefully everyone can see that. So difference between grassland curing. Hopefully you're picking up which are the northern and western slopes. Southern slopes remaining greener, so this effect. Great. I like this photo. It shows aspect really well. And, this is short-lived. This is just on the start of the fire season and won't be retained very long. On the southern side, you can also see that more fuel, and that's normally what we say about the southern aspect. So you can see some of those smaller shrubs persist. And on the northern side, the right-hand side, we've got tree death. So we can see it's a harsher environment on the right-hand side. Cops more sun, drying, hotter, drier environment. Great little photo when we're thinking about aspect. In terms of fire suppression, if we have a year, and hopefully we'll have a year where we've actually got some wet gullies, and if they're talking average or above average rainfalls over summer, the consideration that we might be able to get some assistance from some wet gullies in some areas, and we might have some green vegetation in terms of strategy and tactic as well. In terms of grass and pasture, so thinking about the difference, and good firefighters make sure they spend the time and they have a look at what is burning or what's about to burn. So what we know about crops planted at the same time, it's consistent fuel type, and we generally get more consistent fire behaviour as a result. As the fire moves from that paddock into a different one, and the vegetation changes really quick. So we need to anticipate the change in fire behaviour as it moves into the next paddock. It may be an area where we get some greater level of control, might be an area where we get less control. So we might work hard to try and contain it while it's within that paddock. But that foresight about what's coming up and what's going to burn, not only, so it's moving away from staring at what's currently burning, we're thinking about what's up ahead. Obviously, these areas aren't, they're affected by wind. There's no real wind reduction like we see in the forest, blocking objects such as trees, and so stronger winds, faster moving fires, and again, consideration of that fuel type. Bottom left, the thing that we face around Bendigo, so a lot of farmlets and new divisions. We've got fences all over the place, so fences obviously slow us down, don't slow the fire down. So our strategies need to involve being ahead of the game, making sure that we can keep up and that we've got tankers well placed, even when we've got all of those fence lines and those things that are physical barriers for us. Do you have anything there to add, Eain?
Look, again, you're stealing my thunder, but you're touching on the stuff that probably is as relevant in my part of the world up around Kerrang and through all the cropping country and those sorts of things. It's about, I guess, getting your head in front of the game to some extent and looking at, as you said, what is burning, what potentially could burn, and what impact that's going to have on your ability to control the spread of the fire. The things that we get with a lot of, obviously, cropping country, as you say, it's planted at the same time. It's consistent fuel loads, but when you get to the fence, it might well be the difference between a grazed paddock and a crop that's been harvested or something like that. And our capacity to actually get close to the fire edge and deal with it in those sort of situations is obviously fairly critical. So if you can choose your firefight, you're going to pick the firefight where there's going to be least fuel and it's going to be much easier to get control of the fire.
Eain, also, especially some of the people online are from up north of Bendigo and out west and up around Elmore. Some of those crop fires can put off some quite large flame heights, especially a fully ripened crop with a fair bit of fire activity in it. So some of the tactics of where we're trying to be on the black, burns really clean, but gee, some of the flame heights, we've got to make sure that we don't position our tankers in a spot where we're going to put ourselves into a hot, precarious position.
Yep, for sure, and that's always the critical thing, isn't it? We're trying to put fires out, but we're trying to do it safely, so taking those into account. So this next slide shows fire behaviour based on spot ignition. If you look at the little spot fire at the top of the screen, and that's spot ignition. The next one down is line ignition of about 20 to 30 metres. And the bottom fire is line ignition of over 100 metres. And when we look at the fire behaviour, so line ignition, so where a fire moves off from a single point, it's slow. Where it moves off from line ignition, it moves fast. So the typical things we see after a wind change. And this is about how quick fires build. Obviously, our game is around getting in quick, getting around it before we allow the fire to build, and knocking down the head fire if we can. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute, so it's a bit of a prelude to that.
Brad,
yep.
I've just got a question here from Michael Rogers around that.
Yep.
Are we still trying to cut off the head in a crop?
Yeah, so I'll move to that in a minute. I've got a couple of slides coming up on that. One of the points here, line ignition, is if firefighters turn up to a fire and they're trying to ascertain how many resources, how many trucks they need, and a suppression strategy. If you're thinking in the back of your head about the head fire and how wide it is, if it's 130 metres or more in width, it's most likely reached its full potential. Anything under that is still a building fire. So when we're looking at requesting resources, it should be about what resources we need at the time they arrive. It's not necessarily for a grass fire about how many resources we need right now, because those resources aren't there. So we need to try and envisage the size and type of fire we're going to have when those resources turn up. In terms of a few tips in terms of how we determine how many resources or trucks we need, one of the things I look at is obviously where the fire is going to be when those trucks arrive and what is the objective. And from the objective, the number and type of resources tends to fall out. Rather than just saying make tankers 20, I look at what I'm going to have, how I'm going to use those appliances, and it may not be just tankers that I'm going to ask for either. So, suppression of head fires, and I've left this slide in. This is one that I've stolen from another presentation, and the heading says traditional way of fighting grass fires, and what it shows is crews moving in from an anchor point at the rear of the fire back near the origin, working up the flank and moving their way to the head. And why do we traditionally talk about doing that? Well, it's safe, it's effective to some degree. The shortfalls are that we may not make it to the head fire in time. We may run out of water. While we're making our way to the head fire, it's building in intensity, size and speed, and it may be that we miss our opportunity to get to that head fire, especially if the head fire gets over that 130 metres in width and it reaches its full potential. We may have lost our opportunity for that time or that day. Now, in terms of the slide, as I say, it's titled Traditional Way of Fighting Grass Fires. I think we've been preaching long enough in District 2 that there's other ways to go about tackling grass fires. And I'd be very surprised if anyone listening hadn't heard of the half-forward flank attack or direct attack on the head. And we certainly look at that. Now, firefighters need to consider fuel, weather, topography, all of those things, flame height, number of resources available when they determine what strategy they're going to engage. It's a bit difficult to talk to a slide and give you too many rules. And so that they need to make the objective based on those considerations. So as I said, the issue with starting back at the flank is fire moves away and we may miss our opportunity, but certainly a very safe way of doing things. We're anchored in, we can follow the black and we're not challenged by head fire activity. We look at the next slide, and again, this is one that I've stolen, and you know, the concept of bringing this stuff up isn't new, and it was done many years ago, and I think maybe we lost that knowledge. Maybe the safety first culture maybe helped to do that. And I know in District 2 we've been talking for a long time that perhaps a better option is to engage with a head fire. Again, can we do it? Is it safe to do that? So generally what we say is that engage the head fire unless there's a reason not to. One of those reasons may be that it's unsafe, the head fire is too intense, and we don't have enough resources. In that case, it's quite simple. We go back to the previous option. So start at the anchor point and work our way around, or potentially wait for resources or wait for a change in fire behaviour based on those things. So I think we've probably spoken enough about this in the last probably 5 years in District 2. I know through Mark Gilmore operations and even all of our training, even at minimum skills bushfire firefighter, we even talk about half forward flank attack. Some of the things that allow it to work, we actually need everyone on board. We can't have some tankers trying to do head fire attack and some doing flank. We're kind of all in. And you know, as I say, you know, consider the safety implications, smoke and other hazards, and consider the fuel type. But certainly a more effective way of doing it. Anything there, Eain?
Yeah, Brett, this is probably one of those opportunities where I do get to see firsthand how we go about doing this, and quite regularly I see the first option being the one of choice, where we start at an anchor point of origin, whatever it might be, and start our firefight along the edge of the fire from that point. And you know, on a normal situation, we're probably going to rock up with 2 or 3 or maybe 4 units that are going to be able to address the fire in that way. And quite regularly what I see is that the first truck goes and they start along the flank and they start putting water on and knocking the flank down. The second truck will tag team on there, and they're probably only going to be 20, 30, 40 metres behind, and then the third truck following along behind, so that when the first truck runs out of water they can peel off and the next one takes over. What they're not doing is they're not watching their back. And it's about separation of those resources and the best effect that you can have by doing that. And if you spread those resources out a bit further and keep the third truck, for example, 100 metres behind, and the second truck following the first 40 metres behind, they have a better opportunity to see the things that they might have missed with the first truck and be able to knock them down, so that they're not getting fire coming around behind them and compromising their situation as well. And I see that on a regular occasion where we get tunnel vision, for example, on just chasing the edge of the fire and not being conscious of what's behind us as well.
Yep.
Absolutely. Hey, also, Brett and Eain, Brett, when you were saying about the, it's been discussed for a while, I was sort of thinking back to even early 2000. So, you know, in over 20, sort of leading back into 15, 20 years, this has sort of been talked about. A really good discussion point can be for people that might not have done a lot on the back is that wet line. You know, what's your thoughts around is it a quell and a small town branch 5 or 6 metres back coming in to create a little bit of wet line? What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, for sure. It is. And look, you know, the effectiveness of that wet line will be determined by few weather conditions. And quite often it doesn't hold real well. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create the anchor point that we're supposed to have that we don't necessarily have when we're doing the half forward flank attack. Another option may be that we've got enough trucks in attendance. One truck stays that wet line on the way in and holds that flank, right? So we hold them out for a moment. They hold everything coming up on that flank, and they're called in if they're needed. And so having that tanker sitting there creates another set of eyes and creates that anchor point or safety for those tankers that are engaging on the head fire. Look, it might be an area of low fuel, it might be a road, it might be some of those other things, but generally the wet line, what we do is we just start on the way in. It's very easy and done quickly. That's why we talk about doing that on the way in.
Comment as well, Brett, too. I guess it's one of those things that we don't use as often as potentially we can, and the effectiveness of the wet line that Hugh's talking about as well. If we're simply using water, it has a very, very limited effect in terms of its residual value. The application of a bit of foam, and quite regularly in discussions I've had with brigades up north, have you thought about using foam? Oh, I never thought of that. They're just trying to put the fire out. Well, if they start to consider the use of foam and what that's actually adding to their effect, it's going to have a much better objective as well.
For sure. So this slide, it's actually a movie, if I can get it to play. Just let you watch it for a moment. So that was on the news one night, and I grabbed it. I thought, you know, what a great example. It's not necessarily the sort of photo or video would show at minimum skills at entry level, because of the caliber of people online. We can show it here. We can have a discussion about it. Quite clearly, things could go bad really quickly there. Fire behaviour, you know, was going really well, flames up above the trucks. But if we analyse what's going on there, there's a few things. And they actually get this. This is just a finger of fire, break away from the main fire. The things that I like about this, tankers hunting in packs, right? So working as a team. What I don't like to see at any stage is tankers doing their own thing, right? Together we achieve more. You look at the wolf pack from the German subs, World War II. They knew that working in numbers, they were better off, that they had more success. A lot of our aircraft, Eain, also work in numbers. Single appliances don't impress me much, and generally fail in their objective. And so we look at here that we've actually got, I think it's 4 trucks there working together, mostly on the black. There's one on the unburnt. They're working on it as a group. And the difference here is, and this is where from a training standpoint, it's difficult. This might be achieved because it's a small finger, but if we had 500 metres of this, or a kilometre, we have no hope. So because of the size duration of it, we know that, and as I say, this was successful, this approach, and quite intense fire behaviour, quite safe. And if they fail at that attack, they go back to another strategy and start again, obviously.
The other thing about just looking at that too, Brad, is that probably the less obvious thing is that they're at either end or either side of that head of the fire, 2 trucks either side, and gradually pinching it off from behind, so having a much greater effect than just trying to race straight to the centre of that head. So they're actually reducing the width of the head of the fire, as well as knocking the flames down while they're going.
Yep, for sure. I like this one. It challenges some of the concepts in terms of what we can do. As I say, it's marginal. You can do those things if it's safe, and I don't see anything unsafe, but I can also see that it's going to get untidy if they break from what they're doing at the moment and they finish it up in unburnt fuel.
Brett, just looking at that photo there, what do you think the tanker crew, especially the 2 that are on the black, what's their vision going to be like at the moment?
So not good, and that's one of the considerations for head fire attack. It's a fairly smoky environment, so in terms of crew and well-being, in terms of safety for drivers, There's probably not any stumps in there. It does. I think it was stubble. So
being stubble, there's not normally a large amount of stump or rocks, even though they may be, but in some paddocks. But normally a cropping paddock's fairly smooth.
Yep, for sure. And that's these are the considerations that you need to take into account, and that they've taken into account, and as a result, they were successful. But as I say, work in teams, work number of appliances together, and and that holds you in good stead even for these really large, fast-moving grass fires. If comms fall over and the structure starts to fall over, but you're working as a group, we can quickly come along, and I'll just form you into a strike team if I was a fireground commander out there. I don't care much for what I call you. I'll just turn you into a strike team, and I'll manage you that way. One of the things I say, because I work in incident management teams in operations, quite often I start with 70 trucks. That's how many is on the fireground when I get into the IMT. Quite often we don't know where they are. Quite often they're not in strike team formation. Quite often we don't have comms right. If you work in a group, you can get the comms right. If you work in a group, start to form up, we start to have some chain of command, and we can work things. My biggest disappointment is when we go to a debrief and people that were driving around in a single truck outside all of these procedures then are critical of the way we fought that fire. I can't manage 70 trucks individually. I need them to team up. And as I say, they can either form their own strike team, or we'll just form them up into a little strike team ourselves.
Brett, I've got a question here from Tom Morley. He's asking, has anyone had much success using the front monitors in this type of example?
Yeah, so the front monitors an interesting one. So I think we kind of put them on the trucks, and then we kind of now trying to find a use for them. We know that they're quite good for haystack fires and some other events like that where we need large amounts of water. They certainly are good for really quick knockdown. They may be applicable for this sort of environment whereby you've got a short duration to win or you lose. And the fact that they can put a lot of water on really fast, it depends whether or not we can control the water stream and put it in the right spot. Some people are quite good at doing that, probably better than me. They may be successful, but they're kind of a bit of a niche market, the monitors on the front. And, some people have had good success with them. But others have just emptied tanks far too quick and haven't done much good at all.
Brett, the exposure I've had with monitors is on the some of the 3.4Ds have got V18 or a monitor on the 3.4Cs. They have more ability to, with a person on the back, to have greater knockdown in this type of fire. I've found that the monitors on the front of the trucks are a little bit less responsive, and you're with the driver moving around, you always seem to be behind where you really want to be. Where the ones that are on the sides, you've got a little bit more control, even though you're in a lot more smoke, a lot more radiant heat. But the ones on the side, they've also got that ability to throw that little bit further than, say, a small town branch or a quell, especially if a fire's running up along and through a fence. They can have a good opportunity of doing that. Downside, as you said, is they do use a lot more water unless you're managing it.
Absolutely. So there's kind of a bit of a niche market for these things. They're good if you know what you're doing, and short duration are generally the key.
So Brett, before you go next, I had another one. Peter Farley had a question. He can't pop in the chat function. So Peter, did you want to unmute and let us know what you were telling me earlier?
Yeah, I would, Michelle. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
G'day, guys. How you going?
Good, mate.
Yeah, good. Brett, just just on your head attack, it's not so much the flame height that's going to worry the heck out of you. It's the depth and the heat that you'll endure trying to do it. And it calls on a lot of discipline, and we're starting to see a lot of lack of that on the fireground.
Yeah.
That's about all I need to say on that. And for monitors bouncing around of our paddocks, not a good thing.
Yeah. So a couple good points there, Pete. So when we're looking at fire behaviour, flame dynamics in grass, flame height is different than flame depth. Where we've got flame height is just how tall it is, essentially. Flame depth becomes an issue because it's about, the duration or the actual depth, the flaming front of the fire. Very hard to see actually where that is sometimes, and under strong wind conditions, we can have quite a deep-seated fire edge. Takes more water, takes more effort to control it, and as Pete said, it's very hot and you may not be able to reach the most forward point. But with all of these things, so it does take discipline, and safety is paramount. And if we can't get to the head, we go back to what we know, and we might have to work on the flanks. Now, in saying that, that doesn't mean that we give up for the day. That means that we might move back to flank attack, and we wait for a bit of time. But we need to be nimble enough as firefighters and as an agency to then take up the opportunity where it might present. So maybe an example here, and a lot of people on tonight would have seen me do this, that this is the bushfire simulator where I burn some hessian. I normally do it for pre-season training for brigades. Good way to get a lot of people to the station, because people like doing this rather than listen to me talk. They get to see a bit of flame, and it's a good way just to all the things you've been talking about over the last few weeks in terms of bushfire. COVID-19 kind of throws a spanner in the works for doing it this year, but if restrictions ease, there's opportunity to potentially do some late season discussions around this. And some of the things that come up on the bushfire simulator are the things that we've just been talking about in terms of direct attack on the head, when you can do it, how you can do it, why. And this one, you can actually see that just in front of the trucks, the fire narrows off. And that was what I was talking about in terms of looking for opportunities. You know, how often do we hear about a firefight? We should have, could have done this, but we didn't. Agile firefighters take the opportunity. And where we had that narrow point, we had the resources, so the truck's in the right spot, maybe combined with some aircraft, we might have pulled it up at that location. So these are things that we should be looking out for. So, and that's how we get better at putting out fast-moving grass fires. The other thing that we see is that quite often when we do the simulator or in real life, if we have 10 trucks, commanders split 10 either way, 5 on the eastern flank, 5 on the western flank. We don't have to do things neat. We should do things to meet an objective. So one, you've got to have an objective. So as I said earlier, the resources fall out of that objective. But we should actually do things to meet that objective. So if that means we need to put all 10 trucks on one side so that we actually get to the head fire quicker, there's options for doing that as well. And particularly if it's the eastern flank of the fire and we've got a wind change scheduled for later in the day, absolutely. So we need to be in the back of our mind, if we're going to take a flank, if we're expecting a wind change, take that eastern flank. We need to have that contained prior to the wind change, because we know that most of the damage will be done after that wind change. Do you have anything to add there, Eain? No. So do things in numbers, set that objective. We set the objective, everyone knows what we're trying to achieve, and we achieve a lot more. In terms of resourcing, I quite often hear it when we get a large, fast-moving grass fire get up, where people say make tankers 40, make tankers 50. Generally, from a operations officer point of view in an IMT, if I turn up and there's 50 trucks on the fire ground, the first thing I'll ask for is graders and bulldozers. Generally not enough consideration is put into both of those items. Dozers now for hazard trees, and graders for control lines. We'll talk about those a little bit more on the slide that's coming up. But a consideration is, what do you need to achieve the objective? And a lot of times it's not always just 30 or 40 trucks. Sometimes 30 or 40 trucks speaks to me as if we're not thinking about what we want. We just want numbers and we want to get them there quick. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
Hey Brett, can I just also add from a FIRECOM RDO point of view, at the moment the response tables were taken out to 30 single resources, so we can page 30 single brigades. So all Tanker 2 should be taken out of District 2. But once we get past, once we make tankers 20 and make tankers 30, once we go past that, the CAD system isn't able to respond to any additional vehicles. They have exhausted there, and they'll go straight back to the RDO or the RDC, but it'll be an RDO on a total fireband day or a hot day, and then they will have to activate strike teams. And sometimes by the time the RDO goes back through VicFire to activate a strike team, by the time they page out, all that can take between 10 and 15 minutes from that call of make tankers 40. All right, we've got 20 that have been paged out. We've exhausted the resources. Then we've got to get at least 3 or 4 strike teams. So I think it needs to be worth noting that, excuse me, when people make calls like make tankers 70 and things like that, it's going to take a long period of time to get those sort of resources there.
Yeah. And as I said, it's about getting the right resources there as well, and those number of tracks are obviously going to make a difference, but sometimes it's other things as well. One of the observations here, and Eain McRae would see this a bit from the air, we see it a bit even from the ground, is that fast-moving grass fires, as they get larger, we finish up, the trucks get behind. They might find a bit of a finger, they find an edge, they keep working back in the black where these trucks are on the Hessian, and have a look what's happening with the head fire. Head fire burns freely. Been to some large fires, one out at Morong that had about 60 trucks on it, and when I got to the head fire there was no trucks on it, and I didn't know where all the trucks were, but they were spread out back along the edges, and look, they were probably doing some work and protecting some items, but the head fire was burning freely. So it's one of the things that we see, and you only have to squirt a bit of fire on that travel up the flank, and by the time you get up to the head, you're out of water. I spoke a little bit about wind changes associated with fronts moving through, and obviously safety considerations for those are massive. The suppression strategy should be the eastern flank where we can contain that as early as possible, and the graders can really assist in that, because after the wind change, a grader line will hold, its holding ability is far better than a wet line or a suppressed edge. But we also get small wind changes during the event, and if you have a look at this fire shape, what's dictating the width of the head fire here is those subtle wind changes throughout the day or the fire. And under benign conditions, we get wind changes quite often. You don't notice it much. Most of us say we've only noticed the wind moves around once we strike a match or we get to a fire, because we can actually see it. We can see the smoke and we can see the result of it. But it's happening all the time. And so if we get some of those small, subtle wind changes, what it's doing is it's trying to make our head fire wider. And as we said in the introduction, we don't want that. Skinny head fire, obviously easier to contain. But what we do know is under those really strong winds, particularly northwesterly, and if we look at the fire weather conditions on Black Saturday, the northwest winds prior to the southwest wind change were really consistent, and that's that really strong high pressure system working, and there's not much variation in the wind apart from just ahead of the wind change, where we start to see it start to flutter around and start to move, and obviously after the wind change, where we get that southwesterly wind change come in. Great little photo, this one, showing essentially, smoke in the landscape. So, it's essentially showing us where the wind's moving here. It's got the smoke added so we can see what the wind's doing. We can't normally see that. And it's hugging fairly tight to the lee side of the hill. And the fire would have done that as well. Shows us where our winds are moving. Current research is saying that we probably underestimate downhill fire behaviour in grassland. So generally we'll tell you about the rules that fire goes twice as fast for every 10 degrees and the reverse when it's going downhill. A lot of that marries up pretty well to forest environment, but we do know that we've had some fairly fast moving grass fires downhill. So point there being, don't underestimate downhill fire movement in grass. Do you have anything there, Eain?
No, I think not. Again, obviously you say the value of the photo just in the shape or the effect of the winds, how it's hugging the landscape and rolling over the top of the hill there and dragging the fire down with it. It might well be that if the hill's steep enough or long enough that the effect of the wind and the rate of spread towards the bottom of the hill is going to slow up and give us an opportunity. But very, very clearly, just because we get to the top of the hill doesn't mean the fire's going to slow down and make it any easier for us to get around.
Yeah, for sure.
Brett, I've got a question from Michael Rogers. Should we be using the air observer to more to look at the head and fuel load to assist the incident controller if it's possible?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the tools we've got available, air observers should be doing that, and they should be providing that real-time information to fireground commanders, ground observers, use of local knowledge, incoming appliances, any resource we can. So we need to put a premium on current real-time information. So not only for fireground decisions, but for incident management teams. So incident management teams are always complaining that the information they get is inadequate, so there's not enough of it or it's out of date. So anything we can do to gain that little bit of insight into what's going on, it helps with our warnings and advice, our objectives, pretty much everything. So don't underestimate that. So information comes from a range of different locations. We've just got to be on the lookout for premium information and do what we can to try and collect that. Right.
And Brett, one more. I've just got Chris Jacobson with his hand raised. Chris, did you want to pipe in?
Yeah, I wanted to take you back 2 slides if possible and get Brett or Eain to reinforce the slide with the slight variations in wind, but how much difference there is in the distance of travel between the backing fire, the flanking fires and the head fires, and that reinforces why, if we can safely get to the head fire, we should be trying to do that, because in this slide here, the backing fire from point of origin's only gone 10 or 20 metres. The flanking fire probably 50 to 100, the front fire 500 metres. So, it's reinforcing the importance of that earlier discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. The reality is that head fire burns most of the area burnt. So flanks are driven along generally as a result of head fire activity. Backing fire is insignificant, so backing fire into the wind, flames are leaning onto the black and not preheating and going nowhere. And that's why we get disappointed when we see trucks working on backing fire, because it's moving nowhere. And the worst of the day, so Black Saturday fire conditions, backing fire moved almost nowhere because it was just burning into that really strong wind, no preheating, and went nowhere. And so the majority of the area is being burnt by the head fire. In terms of if you want to try and calculate flanking fire rates of spread, you can put them into your MacArthur meters without any wind. So we would normally calculate head fire rate of spread using MacArthur meter or any of the apps that you've got on your phone nowadays. And we can do sort of similar. It doesn't quite work out, but for flanking fire, we just put it in same conditions, but no wind speed. So head fire is what the game is about. We contain that as quickly as we can. From line ignition, we generally say that probably 5/6 of the area burnt is by head fire. So that doesn't leave much for flanking and backing fire, does it? In terms of flame height and intensity versus probability of control, so just trying to add a bit of value here. So essentially what the table's saying is that if we've got flame length of 4 metres, we pretty much need a 4 metre break to be able to have any chance of controlling that fire, and it needs to be in the absence of trees, so in the absence of spotting. So, so if we're looking at what constitutes a good fire break, so as part of the objective, trying to work out where we're going to pull this thing up, we need to consider the amount of fuel, the width of the break, multiple breaks if possible. And so we see in this next photo, so if fires move right to left, fires hit the first road, fires been moving too fast and not necessarily aided by suppression crews, it's gone over. But it's only gone over in some spots. Those spots may be associated with trees and spotting. But we can see what's happened here. So in that bottom bit, it's almost contained all of that fire, but there's a small breakaway. So those two control lines, so two roads. And so if we're using graders, we can control where they go. We may run them parallel to roads and try and copy this effect where we have those multiple control lines. Generally, we don't want the control lines too close because spotting activity can go over both control lines. We have them too far apart, the fire will spot between them and reach some intensity, and it'll go over the second control line. So there's no good rules for this, but generally the spacing, 5 to 20 metres, something like that, depending on fuel weather topography. But this is fire behaviour through and through, but it also gives a bit of an idea about, some strategies that may work under those strong wind conditions.
Brett, just chiming in there too as well, just to reinforce the messages about the separation of control lines and those sorts of things. We're using natural barriers to try and contain the fire, use them to our advantage. When the head of a fire hits a barrier like that, whether it's an existing road or a barrier that we've created, it's going to take the opportunity to slow up, so it is going to be an opportunity, but it will generally jump in small spots and then run off again. And again, putting my aircraft hat on, what I see time and time again is that the fire appliances get stationed on the road, and the fire goes straight past them, and normally they're in no position to be able to catch up with it. If they are just on the outside or on the ahead of the fire and can pick off those small breakaways, those small spots as they start, we're going to be in a much better position to be able to control them and to pick them off and stop the spread of the fire. Again, the use of foam in those situations to increase the effect of what we're putting onto the fire is going to have a significant impact as well.
Ian, I reckon you make a really good point. At times we've heard over years about tankers making a stand on a road, and they sometimes get burnt over, and it continues on when they would have been better placed in the paddock. I reckon, Brett, this is a really good photo. So I'm going to hit you up right now. You're the air attack supervisor coming in with 335 fully loaded. What are you looking at this photo, and where would some tasking be for 335?
Difficult choice, really, because you've got so many active spots of fire, and one load with the aircraft isn't going to stop the fire per se. Where we would potentially concentrate is on and looking for spot fires out the front, because the main fire is going to reach the spot fires. So it's pointless working on the head of the fire in those scenarios, just straight off with a load. So looking at things like that. And working with the crews. Now, just backtrack a bit too while we're talking about aircraft. Thanks, Hugh, for the foot in the door. The question before about using your air observer and gaining as time-critical value or intel on what's ahead of the fire, what the fire is doing, all those other sorts of things. Time and again, the capacity to be able to communicate that information is limited by the amount of traffic that's happening on the ground. And to be honest, a frustration from me over a long period of time is hearing things like I'm at the gate, I'm out of water, I'm just behind whatever truck it might be, all these other sorts of, I won't call extraneous conversation, I won't call them useless, but extraneous conversations coming over the radio is limiting the overall firefight and how we can best utilise the information that's available to us. And for those that might be involved in an FCV or a control point and being able to properly communicate with the guys in the air is going to give you a much better handle on what's going on. Sometimes, even in this shot, what's happening on the ground is not readily obvious either because it's covered by smoke. But if we can see things from the air that you might not be aware of, and we can also contribute to your overall strategies and objectives by saying, look, you've got an opportunity coming up here, or there's a risk here, there's assets under threat, etc., etc. All that sort of information is stuff that is going to be of major benefit to you if you actually manage the comms that are going on the fireground.
The other thing is, Eain, the air attack supervisor and air observer over the top of the fire can provide really good intel for the INS controller or sector commanders that they're working with. Sometimes with the smoke that's across this fire, we can see that the asset, is it clearly visible at times that some properties are, they've done their pre-season work and it's really mowed down and it might be, they look as though they're defendable. There might be some trucks around it. You can move on to the head fire. Is that readily seen from the air?
Absolutely. And there might well be times when the aircraft is far better utilised, attacking the head of the fire or other things, and the converse might apply, going into asset protection and being able to save a house in the middle of a large property or grass fire or something like that, and have the fire go around it and keep going. Well, then we fight another time. So again, it's that strategy, those tactics that go with all of this stuff. And there's a lot of tools that are available to us now from the air. It's just a matter of tapping into them for the guys on the ground.
While you're on the aircraft, Eain, I've got a question from Paul Zara, who says, would you not protect the asset as a priority with the airstrike?
Depends on the resources that are available on the ground. If you've got trucks that are available that are in a position to be able to protect the asset, absolutely. But there've also been firefights that I've been involved in numerous times where we have gone directly to asset protection and not done a direct operations, direct attack on the spread of the fire, because the assets that were in the way were far more important than the paddock it was burning across.
All right, another one that's come through from Rowan Taylor. With the number of citizen weather station data available through sites like WonderMap, do you encourage the use of this local wind data?
All information is useful. It's going to give you a good indication. A lot of it might be localised. That's going to be the challenge. So it depends on topography, weather conditions, changes that might be coming through, all those things. Again, it's real-time data, and it doesn't necessarily give you an opportunity to anticipate what the fire might be doing in an hour's time or in 2 hours' time and what's going on there. So all useful, absolutely, but not necessarily time critical.
Thanks, Eain. And look, I'll comment with my situation officer hat on. We certainly do use information from places like WonderMap, but we average it across multiple sites so that we don't get anomalies or broken weather stations, because that's quite common, especially with the privately owned ones. I've also got Robert Woolley with your hand up there. Rob, did you want to ask your question? You'll have to unmute.
Did I have my hand up? Well, that was accidental.
Okay, thanks, Rob. All right.
Apologies. Thank you.
Sorry, back to it.
Robert, it is working. It is definitely working.
So in terms of fire behaviour, so grass fire, so watch for trees. So you can see fires move from left to right here. There's some large areas being contained, but where we've had the trees go straight across the road. Not uncommon. As a fire investigator, we see that all the time. We need to be able to trace back where the spot fires come from, and it happens all the time. So if we're going to choose a control line, we might not have anything better than this one, but we need to consider that because we've got eucalypts on the left-hand side, the fire's going to finish up on the right-hand side. And as Eain rightly said, rather than sitting on the road trying to make a stand, that never ends well. We're better off out in the paddock on the right-hand side where we can, where it's safe, not necessarily positioning ourselves directly in front of a head fire, but picking up the spot fires as they come across. I think sometimes we may miss the opportunity, especially along our flanks, to do some burning out. So fire edges inherently uneven. Takes a lot of effort to try and put them out. If we move out to control lines that we create or roads, we've got better access, generally safer. We can take it to a location where we've got terrain in our favour and fuel in our favour. I think in this smoke plume down to the bottom of the screen is a big patch of trees, and with hazardous tree management nowadays, we can either go next to the trees and cause ourselves a range of headaches in terms of management of those hazardous trees and some safety issues, or we can move out a little bit away from those. So at times we get fires that burn into large trees, cropping paddocks. Maybe we should be looking at burning out around those, so we actually take the fire edge out away from under the timber, move out to a properly constructed or consolidated control line. We don't do it very often, but we should consider it. It's a classic part of firefighting, and most places around Australia would do that. We're kind of focused at the moment, putting the edge out wherever it is at whatever cost. Graders, if you've got a pen handy, write down graders make you win. Right? From a suppression point of view, graders make you win. Right? So the line that they put in, they can sometimes 5 kilometres an hour. It's wide. It's generally smooth. It's not a rocky environment. They move quick, and its holding capability is far better than a wet or a dead edge, and we generally don't ask for these early enough, and we work them up the flanks, supported by tankers, and we would do a lot better. Obviously not suitable for all terrain types, forest, rocks and other considerations, but we need to consider those more often.
Hey Brett, it's Hugh. Last week we had 4 guest speakers. One was a Muro for the City of Greater Bendigo, and he provided intel to the listeners online tonight that as RDOs we contact the Merc and the Muro, and each municipality has 2 water tankers and 2 graders, and they're not at the depots. They're normally strategically placed where they have been working, and as he said, that they can travel along at 50 or 60 k's an hour, and as you said, they can, when they get there, they can put in a good mineral earth break pretty quickly in the right conditions.
Yep, for sure. A lot of times when I do IMT work in operations, I'll go in and I'll inherit those 60 trucks, and the first thing I'll do is I'll push the button on at least a couple graders and maybe a dozer or 2 as well. And, whether or not we use them for suppression and knocking down fire edge, or whether or not we put them around the outside after fire's been contained for some security, the earlier we ask for them, the better off we are. Quite often working in operations in IMT, people keep bugging me, where's that grader, where's that grader? The hold-up generally isn't from the IMT. The hold-up is Fireground hasn't asked for one early enough, and these things take a while to get there. Particularly a dozer might take a couple of hours to get there. So if you ask late, its arrival is so much later. Likewise, if we have a fire burning in forest and we have no access, I'll ask the question to everyone, what do you need? And nowadays, most people say we need aircraft. We're kind of, be careful I don't offend Eain here, we potentially put too much emphasis on aircraft. Dozers make you win. If it's in forest and we have no access, what we need most of all is a dozer. We might want aircraft as well, but until we've secured those edges and gained access, aircraft can only go so far.
Hey Brett, from an inch controller's point of view, should we put a slip-on or a truck off-siding a grader, or are they okay to work by themselves?
Well, we should have someone with them. So depending on what the arrangements are, hopefully we deploy them with some level of firefighting appliance with them if they come from Forest Fire Management Victoria or wherever. If not, we're going to have to team them up once they get out there. Sometimes hard to find experienced operators to go with them and the right type of appliance as well. So our issue is if we deploy a dozer, a 3.4C tanker is probably not the suitable appliance to be off-siding that machine unless it was working in grass. If we put in the forest, it would never come back out looking the same way as what it did when it went in. It's a harsh environment, and so ultralights and slip-ons are best suited for those. But again, maybe we should consider task forces where we have a number of tankers working with graders in the grassland environment. We manage them as one unit, and as I said earlier, working as a group, more effective.
I've got another question here for you, Brett, from Ray Berry. Many of the road reserves are being overgrown in my area. Is anyone responsible for keeping the trees under control?
I'm not sure if I can answer that. Look, when we consider what is a suitable control line, one of our issues now is that sometimes roadsides aren't the best spot. They're not slashed, they're not grazed. And ironically, we go to roadsides thinking that they're a suitable break. And in fact, I showed you a photo just a moment ago. Quite often, they're not suitable. They also have traffic and power lines. And sometimes we're better off out in the paddock where we've got lower, more controlled fuel.
Just to emphasise that point too, Brett, and I'll put my VMO hat on, my veg management hat, which I used to be for a while. Quite regularly, the observation that the roadsides will have significant vegetation might well be the biggest problem that you've got. A lot of the time, the paddocks will be eaten out, they'll be cropped or grazed or whatever, and your fuel loads in the paddock are going to be much more susceptible to easier control or suppression than what you'll find on the edge of the road. And in the context of who's responsible for it, not going to buy into that too deeply, but the road managers are the ones that have direct responsibility for it, whether it be councils or Rural Roads Victoria, etc. But the questions around all that sort of stuff is a difficult one to address. Can I also take the opportunity just to emphasise a point you just made about aircraft? I am far from offended by the fact that aircraft, make the point, aircraft don't put fires out, firefighters put fires out. Aircraft are simply a tool that are available to firefighters to help them control the spread of the fire.
Yeah. We like to have shots at each other, me and Ian, that makes things more enjoyable for everyone listening. Some research coming out of Western Australia suggests that if we put the same level of funding that we put into aircraft, into dozers and earth-moving equipment, would be far more successful. At the moment, there's an urge for bigger and better aircraft. Is anyone talking about graders and bulldozers, bigger and better or more of? Not really. That's why you're getting it from me tonight. I'm trying to make a point. If you want to see some improvement, put some emphasis in that area. And lucky last slide. Some photos out of Gippsland, and we still tend to see single appliances working in a location where they're making little to no difference. So make sure that at any time, wherever you are, that you're working towards the objective, hopefully with some other trucks. And if you're not on that outside edge of the fire, you're probably not making much difference. There's quite a few photos come up from last summer of this sort of stuff. I don't know the full story to it, but if I was the fireground commander, I probably want them in a different location than that one. And last one, just to finish. So a nice photo to keep Eain happy of some aircraft, some great fire behaviour here. So we see some backing fire, heads being contained by the road, or driveway leading into the house. Two fires coming together with potential junction zones, and they're probably at that stage where the head fire is significant, so over 100 metres in width, and they're really starting to run. Laying forward, almost no backing fire, not too much flanking fire to speak of, and quite fast, rapid moving, but just a great photo to finish things off.
Yeah, really good photo. Hey, Brett, looks like there has been another question coming from Rowan Taylor. Crews need to also remember and report any single wire earth returns with coordinates for the air resources. So we actually had a strike in District 2 last year at the Pastoria fire, which grounded an aircraft for a period of time. So Eain would be in his role. They're always on the lookout for wires across dams, all that sort of stuff. So it can be quite intense and a fair bit of work. Eain, have you got anything to add for aircraft? No. Is there stuff that the ground crews can do or the incident controllers can do to let you know?
Absolutely. If and SWERS single earth returns are an aircraft killer, to be honest, and that we got out of it as well as we did last season with that aircraft was a blessing, to be honest. A really difficult challenge that was, because the wire actually crossed nearly a kilometre between two poles. So where they were actually working on the fire, they didn't even see the poles. But that's our giveaway. We look for poles and then work out where the wires might be that go between them. But if ground crews are seeing stuff around dams particularly, but even from ridge line to ridge line, they are nigh on impossible to see from the air, and any information that we can get in relation to that is fantastic. Yeah, we might have seen it, but if they, confirm that it's there or which way the wires are going or whatever, appreciate the help.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. And Chris Jacobson has also just put into the chat that no drones, they ground aircraft. So yes, there's nothing worse than having all their aircraft move off a fire because someone's put a drone up to take some footage or some snapshots. So really good advice from Chris. And also another question. Brett, do we have satellite, from anyone else, do we have satellite technology that we can use for fires? Are you guys aware of any satellite technology?
Yeah, we do. We have, there's one called Modus, I think it is. The issue with all of them is they're not real time. They take a bit of time to get to us. Generally, we get them, 12 to 24 hours after the event. We do look at those. Modus and Sentinel hotspots, both of those show us hotspots throughout Australia, and we have used them for fire investigation in the past. We've used them to assess some of the previous fires that we've had. Incident management teams quite often will have a look at those prior to a bad day, just to see what fires have been in the landscape and if there's any potential hotspots. And remembering too that if we have a large fire that we have line scan, which is heat sensing equipment in a aircraft flown at high height, generally at night, and allows us to map a fire and identify areas of heat and hotspots.
Yeah, absolutely. We've gone over a bit of time tonight, but we've had some really good learnings tonight. Just a bit of a recap from Brett. So, from yourself, what's what's some things you would like the troops to take away tonight?
Be aggressive but safe. Always considering safety. Work towards an objective. Together we achieve more. You've got to always be thinking, what is the objective that we're working towards? And if everyone works towards that objective, you achieve something. The objective allows you to determine what resources you need, when and where, and the type of resources.
Yeah, great points. And Eain, yourself, something for the people to take away tonight?
Yeah, I think probably just to emphasise that point from Brett about objectives, but do what you can with what you've got at the time is a critical thing, and make what you're doing the most effective that you can. So consider how you use your resources, but again, I'll keep harping back to things like foam and natural barriers, those sorts of things. Make them work to your advantage. Get in front of the fire, work out where it's going to be when you think you're going to be able to control it. And that's about your objective.
Great, thanks, Eain. Just before we wind up tonight, I've got AGFO Bill Johnson is on line tonight. Bill, are you online?
Yeah, I am. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, everyone. Just a couple of things for me. I'm not going to. Had some slides parked there, but we'll just leave them and just talk. Just reinforce the great knowledge that you've been shared with you tonight, and from me, out of deference to some of the expertise that's online tonight, I'm not going to say too much in case I embarrass myself. But I just want to reinforce those things. Brett's comments, particularly around machinery, absolutely spot on. We're talking about grass fires here. This is CFA. This is our bread and butter, people. This is what we do really, really well, and this is what the fleet was largely designed to do. I'd encourage you to be aggressive. I've written to all the brigades and everyone earlier a couple of months ago, outlining what the intent is and the just reinforcing those messages you've got tonight. I'd encourage you though, if you've got your objective, make sure you tell someone what it is so we can all work towards it. That's really helpful. And so we can support it. Too often, I think we probably don't communicate that effectively. And as we do that, just please make sure your fireground structures grow as the event grows. And if you want to stop making your fireground structures big and cumbersome, keep your fires pretty small. I think that'd be the simplest thing to say. The other thing about grass fires, or any fire actually, is the forgotten art of blacking out, people. It's the part of the firefight that's not sexy and it's hard work, and it's usually the part that we least want to do, but it's probably the most important part. Nothing more embarrassing than going back to put your fire out again. That's probably enough. There's one thing I do have though, and I will ask Michelle if she can share it, is the 7 cardinal sins of firefighting. Have you got that document there, Michelle? It's in your email, perhaps. No. No, that's the district's escalation plan.
All right, let me find that one.
That's okay, no problem. We can share that with you some other times. But folks, if you're looking for anything interesting to read, I would encourage you, if you can get your hands on the old red book, Strategies, Tactics and Administration in the Field, Volume 1, I think it is, by Dick Eain. Nothing's really changed from when that book was written. Very sound knowledge, very well based. And if you did those things, and if you can do these things, then I reckon you're setting yourself up for success. That's all from me, Hugh. I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And 100%, some of the wordings might have changed from to a bit of modern wording that was a bit of doctrine that was put in a couple of years ago. But if we look at what a sin is and the lack of, and how we're going to go about it, 100%. So from here, we've gone nearly half an hour over, but a really good night. I'd like to first of all thank Eain and Brett for coming on board and delivering a really good session and a bit of a review and a refresher, but also provide some really good in-depth knowledge. A couple of really proactive instructors, and we're lucky to have them on board, plus throughout their other roles. Also, thanks to Bill for coming online tonight and providing some information at the end. Again, Michelle is the technical guru. She does all this. I'm very lucky just to get the computer turned on. Next week, building up. The plan is for next week is we're going to have a discussion about working with aircraft. We've touched on it a little bit tonight, but it'll be building up. I'm going to see if Eain's available and another air attack supervisor. They're going to provide a bit of an insight into communications with aircraft, working with multiple aircraft. So at this stage, that is the plan. So thank you. We've had approximately 105 or 10 people on tonight. Really